York for episode 13 of the Beirut Banyan, and we're joined today by Philippe Massoud, owner of Ilili restaurant in Manhattan. Before we get to Philippe, if you're enjoying this podcast, please consider a donation through Patreon. Simply click on the Patreon link in the details box below, or visit our website, beirutbanyan.com, and click on the Patreon button. Any donation is appreciated. There are no sponsors, no advertisers influencing this podcast. Now, pardon the cliche for a moment, but nothing beats Lebanese hospitality. And if there's anyone that's an expert on the subject, it's Philippe Massoud, third generation of a family well known for running restaurants and hotels, oftentimes both, especially when it came to the Coral Beach, a hotel that stayed open, continued operations throughout the Civil War. Now, a lot has been written already about ilili restaurant and the food that's served there. I was more curious about Philippe's backstory and his memories of his father, George Massoud, before he was killed in Coral Beach. I was also curious about what brought him back briefly during the war itself, and what eventually made him settle in the States and now live permanently in New York. And Philippe grew up quickly during the worst years of fighting, and he shares his memories of Coral Beach when his father was running the hotel in the 1980s, when kidnappings and bombings were the norm. The hotel stayed open and was fully operational. And Philippe is a well-respected chef, and the conversation is sprinkled with references to cuisine and where Philippe's personal passion for food comes from. And that perseverance, that strength, is what Philippe took with him to the States, paving the way for opening and running an award-winning Lebanese restaurant in one of the hardest markets in the world. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Philippe Massoud. I'm Ronnie Chatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan. I want you to tell me what it was like as a child, the earliest memories you have of Beirut.
Well, it's interesting. Very few people know or probably remember this, but we lived on Kantari Street across from the Holiday Inn. I remember Kantari because I used to get crunch bars from Aziz, milk and chocolate with the Rice Krispies. And on the occasions that I could shoplift a few, I would. Obviously, they knew that I was doing that. I also remember it because unbeknownst to me, the war was already beginning, because you could see men in black hoods roaming the neighborhoods. We also had a roadblock in front of our house. I remember that.
So we're now going back to the early 70s.
We're talking right before...
Just before the war.
Right before it exploded.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, we were in Alay when it exploded, and we packed our bags and went to the Coral Beach thinking that we'll wait it out so that we can go home. We never went back home.
Wow.
And I never saw Alay or Kantari ever in my life. And we became refugees in our own hotel, like many other families in Lebanon that became refugees at the Coral Beach and other hotels like it. And what happened is that because at the time things were along confessional lines, our home in Alay, because we were Christians in the mountain, were robbed and burned, and our home in Kantari was robbed and burnt. So in essence, we had nothing. We lost everything, and my life begins at the Coral Beach. My parents in one room, and myself with the housekeeper in another room, and my siblings in another room. So in essence, the family unit or the structure, your typical home living, was something that was very foreign to me. And I ended up by living in the Coral Beach up until I was about 11 or 12 years old. Now, the Coral Beach was a mixed blessing because, being such a huge, big area, it was for me like a little fantasy land, which allowed me to escape from the reality of the war, even though we also, in order to protect the Coral Beach, had agreed to become the headquarters of the International Red Cross.
I'll interrupt you just for a moment because you mentioned the Holiday Inn.
Yes.
And the Holiday Inn was open for less than 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So your childhood, your earliest memories are the breakdown
Yes.
of order.
Yes.
And I mean, it's I think all too common that the earliest childhood memories for Lebanese is horrible.
Yeah.
In that sense. But then you have that crunch, Nestle Crunch, shoplifting,
Yeah.
and that's really enjoyable. I mean, it's petty
it's
crime.
anecdotal.
Yeah. But in the childhood sense, Beirut always has that.
Yeah.
Even in times of crisis, maybe perhaps as a child it's easier. There's that normalcy in times of chaos.
Well, I think this genetic will to survive and not be defeated is innate, in my opinion, in the Lebanese, or if you want to get really philosophical, you want to go back to the Phoenician DNA or whatever. Our war in Lebanon was not your typical war. It was a war of attrition. People would lob at each other bombs. Mobsters would take over. And there was pre-agreed upon lines. You don't cross this line, I don't cross that line. I'll bomb your people, you bomb my people, and then we stay in power and reap the benefits, There were maybe in the beginning, and unfortunately, a lot of beautiful people lost their lives misguided by idealism that was very well placed, but the game was so much bigger than their honorable and clean intentions that they got, we lost them for nothing in the end of the day. And initially there was, in my humble opinion, a true civil war, but then eventually it became a mobster war. But to go back to the Coral Beach, just so that you know, when we were evacuated, when we ended up there, my grandparents were still stuck in the building.
In Coral Beach?
In Kantari,
Kantari,
while it was burning.
So they were there?
Yes, my grandfather was a paraplegic.
Okay.
He had gotten ill from like some Hong Kong flu or whatever back then, God knows what. And we had to make a deal with the Murabitun at the time.
Who had just taken over the
Who had
Holiday
just
Inn.
taken over the area
Yeah.
to evacuate my grandfather in a tank because
Wow.
the snipers, and then when there was a lull, my mother was given access to get to the home, walking through cadavers that were still burning, to recoup the couple things that she could recoup, and then the people that stole our apartment, robbed us, came to sell us our own stuff.
You're kidding.
No, absolutely. That was the norm back then. And that's all I remember from that. So, it's short-lived. I remember dancing with my mother in our living room. My mother loved to dance. I remember, holding hands. I remember my dad cooking for us on Sundays and little things like that. I remember giggling with my younger cousin who lived, the whole family was in the building.
Right.
Back then, people lived close to each other like that. But otherwise, and I remember having my first experience with death, because I think the Kataib at the time who were there had a roadblock on which a taxi had not stopped, and they lobbed a grenade at it, and I remember the grenade exploding. So I'm 4 years old at the time, 4.5 or 5.
These are your first memories.
These are my first memories, and I remember seeing bodies covered with tarps and guts all over the place. And I remember my older brother and sister shielding me from viewing what was going on. I also remember that I almost burnt down the apartment because I decided that I was going to try smoking.
Sorry, at 4.
At 4, I sat on the sofa in the living room. I lit the cigarette, and then I saw somebody come. So I pulled the pillow over. I threw the cigarette behind the pillow and put the pillow back in its place and went into my bedroom. And then all of a sudden I started hearing screaming and all that, and I can see smoke seeping through under the door. And I realized I had done something wrong.
Yeah.
And it was this new satin kind of fabric that had just arrived from Paris that my mom had spent a fortune on buying.
Highly flammable.
Highly flammable, of course, polyester or whatever the hell it was. And she's on the phone with the decorator, and they're throwing water at it and it won't go off. Yeah. So he's telling her, cut it up with scissors.
Oh, right.
So
yes.
you have this gaping hole in the sofa. Long story short, when they opened the door to my bedroom and they saw me trembling in fear, they felt that I had gone through enough trauma that I wasn't gonna get punished or screamed at, and that's all I remember. But
so the early years of the Civil War shielded you from discipline.
yes, to say the least. But living in the Coral Beach was something magnificent and scary at the same time, because by the mere fact that, well, first of all, you have to realize that we were a Christian family, a notable Christian family on the west side of Beirut, and like our Muslim brother and sisters that were on the Christian side, we were always under pressure because we were used as pawns and pressure points in a variety of ways, depending on how the militiamen wanted to use us.
I know you were very young those years, but I guess around the same time, 11, 12, my initial interaction with Beirut was Coral Beach.
Oh, wow.
The moment we returned to Lebanon, after the war ended. During the war, we only went to Tripoli via Damascus.
Yeah.
We wouldn't fly into Beirut.
Yeah.
So I never knew Beirut until 91.
Oh,
so
wow.
that's literally just a few
right
months after
the War of Liberation.
Yeah, and Beirut is still recovering, and it's...
Yeah.
I'm in the Coral Beach, and
we had already sold it by then.
You'd already sold it,
Yeah.
but it's my memories of Coral Beach as the early '90s is low flying planes that now don't fly just above that, and it's also, of course, Dahye Uzay, which is very dense and urban. In those years, in the mid '70s, up until you left, was Coral Beach more remote from Beirut?
So here's what's ironic. Coral Beach was built as one of the first beach resort hotels in Lebanon. And at the time, my grandfather had bought the land of both Coral Beach and Summerland.
Okay, so next to each other.
We owned the whole plot.
Oh, did your family own both?
Yeah, we owned the whole plot.
Oh, the plot. Okay,
we owned the whole plot.
Yes.
We built the Coral Beach and opened it in '64. However, back then, despite our valiant efforts to operate it as a beach resort and all that, there were constant problems in the south and with attacks and counterattacks and the PLO and the Israelis and all that, that the place would get booked up for the summer and then empty out of bookings. And the hotel...
So even back then you had that kind of
schism. Because you had, little altercations all the time.
Right.
But for the Western world, it was...
And the airport was bombed several times. You had the Middle East Airlines.
Exactly. So the hotel never took off, even though it was really, a magnificent place. And I think when the war started and all the hotels got destroyed in downtown Beirut, a hotel like the Coral Beach and others that were on the outskirts ended up by being saved, so to speak, because we were the last man standing.
But as a child, was it just more? Did you feel isolated at Coral Beach then, or did you feel like this is still part of the city?
Oh no. To be honest with you, it was the Coral Beach and school, and that's it. There was no city life.
Right.
There was no let's go to the park and let's go play soccer. Or
so this almost like an isolated
yes, it was
hotel.
it was an island. In a way, the way I described it is that it was an oasis of peace in a land of insanity. And it was really unique. I mean, you want to talk about defying death and defying war. You know, I mean, you're sipping rosé while 155 millimeter shells are falling in the sea, and you got 50 caliber bullets whizzing by, and you're doing your laps, and you don't have a care in the world. You know, I mean, I'm exaggerating here, but what made the Coral Beach unique is that we never gave up on coexistence, and it was, for us, it always represented the Lebanon that we all dreamed of having, you know, and we had a Christian staff and a Muslim staff, and, you know, like, the militiamen would come and kidnap our Christian staff. My dad would have to call, you know, XYZ and like, listen, man, you want to eat your escalope milanese? You know, the guy's got to get back into the kitchen and cook. And they would come, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Did they really do that? Did they kidnap them? Well, yeah, they kidnapped them. Oh, I'm so sorry. They'll be back there in like 45 minutes. And then they would bring them back, and, you know, and then another guy who didn't get the instructions not to kidnap would come and take his turn at the kidnapping and send you a list and say, I need you to buy me all this and donate all that.
So they were, in a way, you were protected and taken advantage of by just being in that situation.
Big time. Had we not had the International Red Cross headquartered at Coral Beach, we would have been gone a long time ago. We were feeding pressures all the time, you know.
You know, it's interesting, the Commodore usually gets those Civil War stories simply because journalists were based there.
Correct.
And books have been written about that pirate at the entrance and Beirut to Jerusalem.
Correct.
Coral Beach doesn't have that that maybe internal reputation among Lebanese, because maybe that's...
It's unwritten.
It's an unwritten story. Even though you have Red Cross, you have all that.
There's a lot that happened behind the scenes that was not published. So think of it, at the Commodore they reported, at the Coral Beach they might have met.
Right.
You know,
and Commodore, of course, is harder to get to. It's in the middle of Hamra during the war. Coral Beach doesn't have that issue, but it's still...
I mean, we had the PLO right next door in the Abella Hotel.
Right.
You know, we had the Israeli Navy do a landing at the Coral Beach to attack.
And these hotels share a very tragic story of Lebanon, because these are hotels, and here they're being used as something very different. And even then, you're still trying to keep what it was meant to be in the worst times.
Absolutely.
Is it just a coincidence that the kitchen and it's there, and your father and the story, is it just mere luck that you're so close?
It's not. So you have to realize that I'm third generation in it. My grandfather is the one that started it. The Coral Beach to me represents defying all odds, because, you know, I remember my father working, you know, 15, 16 hours taking apart a generator because the fuel oil that we got delivered was full of water and sand. And he wanted to make sure that our guests had hot water to bathe in and air conditioning, to, you know, working out all sorts of deals to try and get food into the hotel so that we could you know, the amount of diplomacy, negotiation, hostage negotiation. I mean, every possible angle of the word negotiation I endured. And you know, my father was the type of guy, if you came to rob him, you walked out feeling bad that you even thought that you could rob him. You know, he was one of those guys.
It's not that you went and then pursued a hotel, right? You didn't. I'm talking really about this like little.
So let me tell you. So because of the Sunday night dinners that we used to do at home in Qatar.
Well, going back now to your
when we get to the Coral Beach, at first I'm forbidden from entering the kitchen. I'm forbidden from going behind the scenes. And slowly but surely, eventually, you know, we're eating with the staff, akl shaghile, you know, we were eating the same as everybody else. It's called family meal in my industry. You know, I discovered the patisserie, you know, start opening up cabinets, and then all of a sudden I find sablé with apricot jam and chocolate sablés and little tarts.
So this is not necessarily generation family business. This is your own individual curiosity.
This is me going in and gobbling up all the petit fours without asking anyone, not knowing that they were prepared for a party or for some gala or for whatever, and just acting like this is my place. I can do whatever the hell I want. And and climbing on a step ladder on top of the baking oven to, dip into the tempered chocolate, with Nutella on demand, but my own kind of. So all of that started at a very young age, and I'm watching this. I'm watching them, chop parsley, tabbouleh for 1,000 people. I'm watching them do fatayers around the table. I'm watching all of this, and I'm tasting and I'm eating.
And this is school and, in a sense, food.
Yes.
Right? There's just nothing.
Nothing else.
That's it.
That's it.
Right.
Nothing else whatsoever.
Right. So you're working in a sense without.
Well, I'm working at the self-service, so I would put 2 phone books under, and I would work the register because I wanted to feel like I was important, and I had a pretty decent belly. I was very muscular as a kid, and then I would work the fry station because I love the fries. We made some of the best fries at the self-service over there, and then what happened is that. We moved to an apartment in Ramlet Al Baida.
So next to the hotel, in a sense.
Yes, not far away, where the Ajami restaurant used to be. It's next to the Arab building. And then we get there, and all of a sudden, all this food that I had on demand, I no longer have.
Right.
Because I'm in a house, in a regular kitchen, and I can't have petit fours whenever I want, and I can't have crepes. And I can't have creme fraiche, and I can't have chocolate. And I start calling the chef. I'm like, I need technical support. I want to make this because I miss it and I want to eat it.
So you're a kid in the war in Ramlet Al Baida, calling Coral Beach
Kitchen.
Yeah,
Chef Skandar and Chef Gabi, who was, and then there was Ahmed Shalain also, and Ali Dahir.
So you really have. This is the perfect situation for a kid. Because lawlessness, the positive side when you're young is that you're free. You don't really care about the conflict so much as you care about the food.
Yeah, for me it was all about that. Watching, we used to do steak au poivre tableside at Restaurant du Cap, which was the restaurant of the hotel where Sundays were like an amazing family brunch day. So that was kind of really my first cooking experience, cooking crêpes Suzettes and steak au poivre, old school style, because we had sent. We had French chefs that had trained our staff, and we did a kick-ass steak au poivre. I always wanted to dabble, and my dad would always kick me out. He's like, don't get the hell out of here. This industry is hell. It's a lot of work. It's.
And kick me out to just avoid this.
Oh yeah.
Interesting.
So
okay.
I had a secret code with the staff.
Yes.
That when my dad came, they gave me warnings so that I could escape.
Well, that's fun.
From different areas of the hotel.
Was it more out of he didn't want someone running around the kitchen, or was he actually telling you don't pursue this career?
No, he told me not to pursue this career, and also did not want.
Neither.
It was like two. Both of them.
And this is just your opinion. Do you think he was trying to protect you from staying at Coral Beach?
No, listen. The life of a hospitalier is a difficult life. Yeah. It's very demanding. Yeah. It's
even the smallest of restaurants.
You're giving 100% of your soul, both to your staff and to your guests. Yeah. So by the time you get home, the life force in you is very depleted, and it takes quite a unique family to have people in the hospitality industry. And I think my dad wanted something better for me because he saw how hard he was working. He was working 14, 15-hour days. He would leave home at 7 o'clock in the morning, get back home around 7, 8 o'clock. And then they would go out.
Right.
But I think he did not want. He knew. When you see your friends are doing. Law or investment banking or whatever, and they're at one level and you're still at a certain level, the math is pretty straightforward,
So he was betting on you, I'm assuming getting out of Lebanon altogether and pursuing something else.
Not with me,
no,
because that was for me just not possible and not gonna happen. And as I was the last one to leave, so my sister left, then my brother left.
And you're there.
And then I stayed. And I was brought to the U.S. in a very calculated way, because they told me, go check it out. If you don't like it, you come back.
Okay.
But then they said you cannot come back.
Right.
And before I came to the U.S., I was getting weekly or bi-weekly death threats on the phone. People calling the house.
Before you traveled.
Yeah, before I traveled. Yeah. They would call right after I would get back from school.
Yeah.
And tell me, oh, we're gonna kill you, and I'll be like, well, why do you want to kill me? I don't know you. What did I do to you? Yeah. And we would have like half an hour conversation.
So sorry, they were talking to you
to me
directly.
On the phone, yes.
But you're very young at this age.
I'm 14.
14. What was it about you that they wanted?
Well, I used to drive when I was I drove when I was 11 years old in Beirut.
Okay, so they thought of you as maybe a bit older and more more involved.
Correct.
Okay. But this very threatening for a teenage. I mean,
for me, it was part of the. Yeah. This was part of the jungle there.
Yes.
If you want, I didn't know that it was such a bad thing.
Yeah.
I didn't know that at the time my father was already getting, indecent proposals. In the sense that he was pressured. I had not known, for example, that the hotel had been robbed a couple of times, and things. You have to realize, I'm talking now 84, 85, 86,
these are the worst
87,
years
88.
Yeah.
Beirut is in total free fall and anarchy. Even the so-called allies are fighting each other over car accidents.
Yeah.
And it was a free-for-all, and I think people saw us as a target of opportunity because eventually the hotel was sold for absolutely nothing, and the militias at the time were really trying to compartmentalize Beirut into a Christian and Muslim, and there were all these dirty games that were taking place to really create this true division, which never worked out because you cannot divide the Lebanese, you can manipulate some of them, but ultimately, there's a bond that is more sacred. It got put in hibernation, and then it came back. But, I mean, don't get me wrong. Lebanon is a bit divided over confessional lines, but the true Lebanese, the few real patriots that are out there, nobody can unglue the Lebanon, that they hold dear to themselves.
So in a way, you left Lebanon as the nightmare is expanding, and then by '82, the Israeli invasion hits everyone in Beirut.
Correct, and that was insane because our father decided to stay and sent us out to the Christian areas.
Oh, so in '82 he was still at Court.
Oh yeah, he stayed through the whole war. Again, my father lived to protect the hotel, and he stayed there because he knew that if he left it would be looted and taken advantage of.
So he shielded you from the invasion in a sense.
He shielded us from the invasion, and I'll never forget. I was in Fareya at the time, like many people were. And you could see Israeli soldiers walk around over there, and they were handing out pamphlets of how to speak Hebrew. I'll never forget that. But then we lost contact with my father for about 2 weeks, I think, if I remember correctly. And things were getting a little antsy because a bomb fell on a communication tower that the International Red Cross had, so we had no contact whatsoever. And then
such a small.
The Israelis were doing sorties, and the airplanes would fly really, really low over Ayun Simin. And the first time it happened, I was like, okay. The second time it happened, it really rubbed me the wrong way, and that changed my entire perception of what was going on. And I really, I was very, very distraught, and I realized that, we were losing control, and things were no longer in our control, while many of my colleagues, if you want, or citizen friends, were in a different frame of mind, and here I was, a West Beiruti, on among, people that were on the other side
Yep.
of the spectrum, and they were just not understanding that, I mean, I'll never forget, I was standing, I was across from the Hotel Alexandre in Ashrafi, I'll never forget, overseeing West Beirut, and it was in flames. I mean, the whole horizon, I mean, talk apocalypse now times 10, just the whole skylight up in fire. That was kind of really a threshold moment, because the whole loss of control,
Yeah, it's a earlier version of what happened 13 years ago. A summer invasion, a summer war.
Mm-hmm.
People go up to the mountains if they can, and they watch Beirut being bombed.
Yeah.
And there's a new Lebanese generation that can relate to what you're saying, and they don't know the Israeli
which
invasion.
is wrong. Which is wrong.
I was one. I don't have any recollection of 1982, but I know 2006.
Yeah.
And the way you're describing that black smoke and watching Beirut being bombed while you're still sort of there.
Yeah.
I mean, you're
Yeah.
either.
Oh no, I was there.
Yeah.
So I was there. So just to tell you, we were there until the Israelis reached, I think, Khalde. So we're not talking that far away. I mean,
Yes.
and we could see the
So
bomb.
just south of the airport.
Yeah, the airplanes would go fly over the sea. I mean, I would see like a dozen Israeli jets on a daily basis, doing sorties, and the noise of the airplanes was soul piercing. It really shakes you at your inner core. That that rocket kind of noise. That was unbelievable. And then one thing that was really frustrating as well was the sound of ambulances. And when after the Israeli war, when Beirut started deteriorating, and you had the war of the camps, and you had the
anarchy,
PSP and Amal fighting with each other, Amal and Hezbollah fighting each other. Everybody was fighting everybody. The amount of ambulances that would drive by my school, was just unbelievable. That I became sort of almost. I started having an allergic reaction to because for me it meant death.
Yeah.
Every time I heard an ambulance, it meant another soul has perished. Another soul has perished. It was very, very traumatic, that period.
The younger generation, unfortunately, can relate to what you're saying.
Yes, which is wrong.
Which is wrong.
So wrong. Oh, you have a soldier. You're almost soldier militiaman.
Yeah, I mean, you're being actually trained to fight.
I was.
Oh, you were?
I did a little bit, yes. Nothing too serious. So I went to both sides of the front. So I went to the front on Sodeko with the Lebanese forces, and I went to the opposite side with Amal and so just imagine that.
Yeah.
And I never told this to anybody, but I had awakened. I knew that this war was a farce, and I knew that humanity had failed miserably in Lebanon with what was going on.
You were able to come to that conclusion as an adolescent.
It was very crazy. Yes,
Yeah.
it was. So what's interesting is that this happened right after the Israeli war. I was driving my mom from the Coral Beach home, so I'm 13 and a half, 14.
It's so funny.
Yeah. But this was it.
That's how it is, yeah.
Yeah, that's the way it was. I used to drag race on the corniche of Ramat al-Waida every morning because I would go down to heat up Hammis Siyara, to heat up the engine of the car, and then my friends would do the same for their father.
Yeah.
And then we would meet on the highway and try to drag race. But anyways, what happens is that driving my mom from the Coral Beach, we get stopped on a roadblock that is, I think, a Hezbollah roadblock of some sort. And the guy that stops us is the guy that's with me in school.
Oh.
And I'm like,
also, he's a teenager too.
Yeah, he's older. He's like two grades older.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yo, what's up? What's going on? So we passed the roadblock, and my mom is like, who is this?
Yeah.
I said, oh, this is so and so. He goes to school with me.
Classmate, yeah.
She's like, he goes to school with you? You're going to school with people like that? And she doesn't know that I was almost getting sucked into doing the same on the other side.
Yes. That was it for her.
Yeah.
It's like,
I think that was
this is it.
Yeah.
So you come as a teenager. You happen to be here when tragedy hits your family?
So I'm 20 days in Beirut.
Yes.
I spent 10 days in West Beirut and 10 days in East Beirut. And the 10 days I spent in West Beirut were the first time in my life that my father does not kick me out of his office and talks business in front of me in my presence. And I am in heaven.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, this guy is treating me like a man. Finally,
Yes.
we're connecting and all that. And I don't, I'm not thinking my time is precious. The clock is ticking here,
And I'm sure it feels good to be back.
Yeah, it feels great to be back. And then I leave.
Yeah.
So imagine so I leave August of 85. August of 85. I get back to Lebanon August 1st of 86.
Right.
I stay till August 21st or 25th or whatever, and then I come back and I go to school. And then on October 30th, I get woken up from my sleep at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm told that my dad had been assassinated. And imagine you're told that, and you're spending 3 hours trying to dial to get to Lebanon.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't get through, because you had to call AT&T international operator, who then would try to connect you. Surprisingly, I don't recall crying. I might have, but I don't recall crying. And then the entire family from the US gathers at the airport. We fly to France. We get to France, fly back to Lebanon. We land at the airport, and there's like guns and cars all over the airplane because presumably our life was threatened because they didn't know what had happened. We're like ushered into cars and protected and what have you. And we end up at the Coral Beach. Yeah. And for me, it was, what was very devastating was that, in our culture, fathers and sons don't have a good relationship until the son becomes a man. Otherwise, the child is a nuisance. And to have tasted for those 10 days, this heavenly connection, with my father was so intoxicating and so delicious, so amazing, that I was longing to taste it again, and then to realize that it had been robbed of me was the most devastating.
You're able to have a very, very special moment with your father as both a friend and as someone that he's treating you as almost an adult.
Yes.
Yeah. And those are your last memories of your father.
The only.
Yeah,
because otherwise the rest was this disciplinarian.
Yeah.
This,
So from removing you from the kitchen, he's now letting you into his kitchen, in a sense.
Exactly. And that, like...
Yeah. Again, your relationship to Lebanon, I'm guessing, changes dramatically afterwards.
It does and it does not, because and I'll tell you why. We spend Christmas. We visit, because of the security reason, we go to Europe to meet my mother. But then the summer of '87, I go back to Lebanon.
Oh.
And my mother, myself, and my brother run the Coral Beach.
Oh.
And my mother, God bless her, she's an amazing woman, had never run a restaurant or a hotel or anything like that, takes the hotel under her wing and keeps the legacy going. And I'm sorting out the nightclub and making sure we have the best music. She's focusing on the food and beverage program. I'm tasting stuff. And we run the hotel for 2 summers in a row.
You're still in school here.
I'm still in school here.
And you're running a hotel at home.
Yes, it's only when we're there. I mean,
sure, of course, but I mean, you are in a way.
But we helped as best as we could, and what nobody knows is that it was the first time that the hotel was profitable since it had opened.
So in the worst years of fighting, these are the horrible years. Coral Beach
my mom was brilliant. What she did is that, and again, remember, this is a woman who never peeled an orange in her life. She came from a very blessed background. Her family had done extremely well, and all of a sudden she's the chef d'orchestre of this huge enterprise.
Yeah.
So she exploits every food and beverage outlet in the hotel into generating revenues, and all of a sudden the hotel becomes a very active social ground where each revenue center is being maximized and performing. The only thing is that the innocence and the joy of happiness that I had as a child, I never was able to bring back. And at some point I will bring back because, you know, I need to pause and smell the roses, you know. When you have a life that is all about surviving and struggling and trying to make things happen, you deflect your own well-being and your own living to the objective that you've set yourself, and eventually you become an addict to this, you know, routine, and it's an interesting, you know, I'm seeing myself, you know, change as I grow older, but it's all in steps, and when you're learning from yourself and by yourself, and there's nobody to tell you what's right from wrong. It takes a bit longer, but it's the only way to, you know.
But you were able to do some form of justice to your father by keeping the Coral Beach running, you and your family. You spend your summers and you're 17, 18, I'm guessing? Instead of playing around among teenagers in America.
I had my fun.
I'm sure, but you dedicate your summer months to war-torn Beirut, and in a way keeping your father's legacy alive.
Absolutely. And then I get accepted to Cornell University, where I decide to go and study hotel and restaurant management.
Is that last conversation with your father, is it on your mind when you're pursuing the next stage of your life?
It's not, because at that point I am just a surviving human being. From the moment my father was killed until I graduated from college, I was somebody in denial, and I'll explain that to you. I don't know that I'm in denial.
You don't know that you're in denial.
But I know today, with the wisdom that I have, that for somebody to endure the shock of the loss of a parent at such a young age, by default, if you don't deal with that event, it can destroy you and damage you for the rest of your life, you know. And I'll never forget, because in high school, I used to, you know, the year it happened, I was like a zombie. I was cutting classes, I started smoking. And I'll never forget, there was a physics teacher that came and told me, he's like, listen, I want you to know something. What you're going through, nobody should have to go through. But I want you to realize that there's two ways this is going to end up for you. Either you're going to become a drug addict and die, or you're going to use the power of this event and it's going to fuel your fire.
In this moment, are you able to feel real sympathy from people that don't really know your background? They know that something bad happened, but are you able to relate to them?
No. I see all the kids with their parents. And I'm the only one without a parent. I don't have my mom, I don't have my dad. And then I see a dad hugging his child, and I realize, holy shit, I don't have a father. And I'm sitting in class, so I'm studying hotel and restaurant management.
By choice?
By choice, because I'm going to go back and run the Coral Beach and grow the family brand.
So so Coral Beach was still on the horizon.
Yes.
Okay.
And I knew how to cook. I knew everything. I knew, I knew maintenance. I knew the reception. I knew the reservation desk. I knew the housekeeping desk. I knew everything. I mean, for me, it's like I'm sitting in the classroom, and you got these guys spewing theory on you that is in some ways very disconnected from reality. So I'm having an adverse reaction and I'm raising my hand. Excuse me, this is not the way it is. This is the way it is. Whatever you're saying is not real. You had the opportunity to join fraternities and all that. I didn't want to. I preferred my independence, so I could get in everywhere I wanted to go. And everything is going relatively okay. And then on March of 1988, my second semester, my family calls me and tells me, by the way, we sold the Coral Beach.
You were not expecting that?
I had no clue that even that was on the table. no inkling whatsoever, nor was I ever asked to opine.
And that's the reason you're at Cornell.
Yes, I lose my mind. I was like, how could you guys do this to me? What
When
am I doing
when you
here?
say you guys, you mean your immediate
The family.
So they just did not tell you.
They did not tell me, and I understand why, but regardless, for me, it was an inexcusable sale. Now, in retrospect, when my mom was running the hotel, her life was under threat.
Yeah.
After they killed my father, my mom was still being threatened.
Yeah.
You know, and even though all the powers that be that sit today at the government tables promised to protect us and all that, we saw what happened with my dad.
Yeah.
And then we were like, we're not going to risk your mother as well.
Yeah.
So we were being shaken down aggressively by the system, you know. So here everything goes downhill. You know, I'm like uninterested to go to class. What am I going to do? Like, you know, like all I'm studying is to go back and run the family business, etc. Now on the flip side, there was a Lebanese owned restaurant on campus that was called Aladdin's.
Jesus.
So I go there, I'm like, okay, let me go figure this thing out. I taste the food. And
it's funny because it's before the Disney movie.
Yeah,
so
it's
this
before
is
the
like,
Disney movie.
you could say it's a little more authentic.
It was a guy from Zahli. So I go there and I'm like, who's the chef here? I meet this guy Nadeem. I'm like, wow, you're a chef? He's like, no, actually, I'm the contractor that built the place, but now I'm the chef. I'm like, okay, that's great. We're gonna really get along.
Mm-hmm.
So every day I go to this Aladdin's and I'm tasting the hummus and it's disgusting, and I'm tasting the baba ghanoush and it's unedible, and the fattoush is like, you know, not freshly squeezed lemon.
And no one really knows because they don't know.
Nobody knows who I am.
This is just no. I mean, nobody. Your peers don't know what Lebanese food should taste. So they're like, no, this is just Aladdin. It's not.
So I'm imploring Nadeem and like, dude, let's fix this. We can make it better, etc. Now, while I'm there, I realized, I said, okay, well, you know what? This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to open a Lebanese restaurant.
You knew it then.
I knew it then.
You're given every valid reason to never care about Lebanon or this sector. You've been thrown into, an isolated, independent, an extreme independence in America. And you're now also legitimately able to switch careers altogether. You don't need to be at Cornell doing this.
There's nobody to guide me.
There's no one.
See, this is the problem, is that nobody came and told me, Philippe, you should do this.
Nobody told you, but I can tell that you wanted to do this because you don't need to help Aladdin improve their food.
Well, no. First of all, I was a very proud Lebanese, you have to understand. Either serve Lebanese food or go call it Greek mama something or whatever, but...
So the food is what you were proud of at that moment. That this cuisine deserves better.
Yes.
Forget the country, forget the politics.
1,000,000%.
It's the food that you can't throw the food away
1,000,000%. And that transformation for me happened when we started doing meza at the Coral Beach. So I realized Coral Beach was doing Polynesian and French food with curries and langoustines and tournedos rossini and all that. And all of a sudden we're doing لبنة معاز ورقاقات بجبنة وpoussin grillé and all that stuff. And we were serving some of the best meza. And I remember we were all surprised as to how much of a success it was. My father included, and then my mother thereafter.
You're able to see what you can preserve from a country that's gone to hell. The food is not something that we can take lightly. I mean, politicians, the war, out of your control. The food's not out of your control.
Mazboot, exactly.
And you're willing to bet on this.
Yeah. Obviously, I'm too young at the time, and in all fairness to the ownership of Aladdin's, they took me seriously up to a point, and then it didn't really pan out for whatever reasons.
But the drive is there.
The drive is there, but at the same time, I am a rudderless ship from a mental point of view. Lost the Coral Beach, lost my dad. Imagine like you're sitting in a classroom, they're talking about topics, and all you can think about is seeing your dad being shot. And you're having like all sorts of crazy, visions and all that. And I'm sure whenever you endure a tragedy, I don't know if it's the same for you, but I rebuild the whole incident. So I see it fully. I live it from his perspective, I live it from my perspective, and when you undergo such trauma, I guess you reconstruct all these things with the facts that you have in front of you.
Yeah.
So eventually,
It's hard to be in a classroom after that.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard to be in a classroom, and if I had at the time anybody advising me and all that, I would not have gone to college. You know, I was not enjoying being in classes. So then I moved to New York City.
So you're
I'm
now
19.
19?
19.
You're in New York.
I'm in New York. Cornell had suspended me. I go back to Cornell, and then I get kicked out. And then I tell my mom, you know what, خلاص. I don't want to deal with the United States. I want to come back to Lebanon.
Yeah.
And all along, you know, every time I talk to friends of my father, they're like, Philippe, the gods are telling you to come back to Lebanon. This is why you're having such a hard time. You need to come back to us, and I don't know what. I'm like, yeah. So I go back to Lebanon, and I have nothing to my name, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to apply to the American University of Beirut.
Yeah.
And I get on my way to my interview at the American University of Beirut, there was a Syrian army roadblock that was in front of what used to be Majzoub Optic, you know, in that when you're coming down from Hamra and you got to make a left-hand turn to get to the AUB.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
So the Syrian army had their headquarters there.
Yeah.
And it was raining that day. And there was nobody at the roadblock, so I took I veered left to make my left-hand turn. I make my left-hand turn, and all of a sudden I hear screaming and shooting in the air. And I was wearing a suit at the time because I was coming to meet with the president of the AUB. I was very fortunate to be given a chance to apply. You know, I'm going to be a patriot, and I'm going to come back to Lebanon. Yeah. So the guy comes and grabs me from the necktie and tries to pull me out of the car. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, get out of the car. You didn't stop at the roadblock. I said, I'm sorry, but there is no roadblock. There was nobody standing.
Yeah.
It had started raining, so
right.
maybe they went in to come back out or whatever. Looking at the back rearview mirror of the car, I mistakenly saw him wave, and I thought he was telling me to go.
Oh.
So I take off, and I make like 100, 200 meters, and I see like 6 guys running and shooting again. I'm like, oh my God.
2 misunderstandings.
2 misunderstandings is too many. Yeah. I get out of the car. No, he tries to get me out of the car. I come out of the car, and it's raining, so I open my umbrella. He knocks the umbrella off. I put the umbrella back on. He tries to knock the umbrella off. I push him off. He tries to hit me. I knock him out. The next guy comes, tries to beat me up. I beat him up again. The third guy comes, puts a bullet in his AK-47, puts it on me and says, come with me. So I bring my hands down, and it's like some guy that's like 5'1", and the guy looks at me, he's like, you hit him? You hit Hafiz al-Assad, poof, and starts hitting the shit out of me. And then there's another guy in like pink dress and another guy in commando, like I forgot, patterned dress outfit, and they're like 4 guys, and they start beating the shit out of me. And I'm telling them, guys, take it easy. I am with you. We are fighting with you against Saddam. You know, we in America, and I don't know what. He takes his knife, he puts it on my throat like this. He's like, we're gonna take you to Mazzi, and I don't know what. And I'm like, listen, guys, please call this number. You know, call this person. He's a friend of your friends. Just tell them who you have. So while they're doing this to me, they hit me on my head with the gun, and my reflex is to pee myself, which is fine, no problem. And then there's a guy that was a client of ours at the Coral Beach who was stuck in traffic in his white Renault Sank, who turns his face and he sees me and he's like, Philippe? Like, what the fuck is happening? And I'm like, go, don't worry about it. And that like really squeezes my heart, like really bad. Then there's a woman that's walking by, and the woman, I don't know who she is. She starts screaming at them and tells them I'm her brother. She says that, and I break down. I start crying. You know, because all of a sudden I'm realizing this is Lebanese civilians against the occupier. They're feeling, you know, they're all feeling this and it like destroyed me. Long story short, the guy finally makes his phone call, comes, brings me a piece of Kleenex because I had started crying, gives me a cigarette, and he tells me, he's like, listen, man, we're watching you from now until eternity, be careful what you do. So I go to meet the president of the university.
You're joking.
Yeah.
You're still...
Yeah, with my
come on.
my piss in my pants and everything. If I have to repress my freedom of speech this way, I'll end up dead. There's no way that I'm not compatible with the current, the way things are in the country.
Your father pays the ultimate price, and you're still going back.
Yeah.
And you're still believing in the Coral Beach, and
Yeah.
you're believing in Lebanon.
Yeah.
And it's after the war ends that you're faced with the dark reality of post-war Lebanon. And that, to you, is more dangerous than the war.
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
Big time. Because you were under an occupation that was indoctrinating the mass populace. And,
Yes.
And the Syrian regime was really penetrating very, very deep
Yeah.
into the fabric of Lebanon, through the society, through the businesses. I mean, they were taking percentage points
Yeah.
from everybody. They were forcing everybody to be partners with them. They were forcing the prime minister to do deals that he should not have ever made, and so on and so forth.
And you leave.
And luckily I get accepted to Rochester Institute of Technology, and I leave. I get to the campus of Rochester Institute of Technology, and it's this ugliest campus on planet. It looks like a maximum security prison.
Look at the dichotomy, AUB, right?
Well,
And
Cornell, amazing.
Sure, but I mean,
Yeah.
AUB in itself is very special,
إيه.
and then suddenly you're in the...
بس هونيك يعني ولا أبشع من هيك كامبس يعني ما فيني خبرك. هلا don't get me wrong, top 5 in hotel, restaurant, schools.
But can I ask you, because you had already been in university and you saw a restaurant that could have a serious makeover and
Yeah.
did you still have that in you at this point?
Yes.
So
I knew I was going back to New York to open a restaurant.
Oh, you knew that.
Oh, yeah.
So from Beirut back to New York, you said that's it.
And I went and I trained. So in
Okay.
between my year of graduation,
Yes.
I did a 6 months training. I worked at Burj Al Hamam in Lebanon.
Okay.
I worked at D1 in Paris,
Yeah.
which doesn't exist anymore. I worked at Noura in Paris.
So you very quickly...
I wanted to confirm
Yeah.
that what I knew was correct, and the recipes I had written
Yes.
were not crazy. And
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to have a lot of the recipes from my family, from the hotel.
Right.
So I never was... Cooking for me was second nature. It was not something that I had to think about.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, combining flavors, calibrating a dish. For me, it became, I taught myself what happens to an ingredient, how does it evolve over time, how does it evolve under heat, under humidity, under
Right.
dryness, etc. All the different permutations. So cooking became a mathematical equation for me, so to speak.
And you saw it, that's the goal. That you're going to have one day your own restaurant.
Yes, but not ilili yet.
Of course.
I wanted to do the fast casual, and I was like, I'm gonna sell you the franchise. You're gonna buy a CD. You're gonna put it in your computer, and everything's gonna be done for you, kind of.
Right.
You know, with videos of very lofty goals.
But I mean, you're also, to be fair, you're in your early
21.
20s. Yeah,
21,
so you're not, I mean, it's impossible for you to know exactly where this is going. But you saw yourself running an institution.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you fast forward, you're getting hands-on training globally from Beirut to Paris.
And Spain.
In Spain.
Yeah.
And you get your degree, you're in America. There's no necessity to go back to Lebanon.
No, everybody's soliciting me and
Right.
my brother to some extent to go back to Lebanon.
But you refuse to.
To take over the Coral Beach,
Yes.
to run it.
Yes.
Not only do we refuse, we saw that Lebanon was broken and it was far from being fixed, and we knew that we were going to go to, despite the Prime Minister Hariri's intent, we knew that he was too much of an optimist, from our vantage point, and I knew also from the fact that every 4 or 5 years there was an implosion. There was like a cycle into this.
And that's post-war.
The Lebanese tragedy,
Yeah. That's not. I mean, this is after.
And every time we would go back, friends. So we had two reactions. I had two reactions. One, you are so smart and lucky you left. You idiots! Why did you leave? Look at how much money these guys are making, right? And then in the end, unfortunately today, if I were to compare Lebanon to going to the casino, right now, I am winning, not the house, so to speak.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
But this kind of background, I think, is essential to taking big risks. You recreate a form of Lebanese patriotism, a form of pride, on your own. You are able to.
It's the Lebanon that I saw, the Lebanon that my father and mother educated me in.
Yeah.
When I say that the Coral Beach was an oasis of peace, where people gathered, and arch enemies talked behind the scenes or in front of the scenes, or and people celebrated life. For me, that's the Lebanon I grew up in. And ilili is an homage to that heritage. Ilili for me, to give you an example, is a New York restaurant by New Yorkers that happens to serve Lebanese food, not because I don't want it to be a Lebanese restaurant that is serving New York,
right?
But because in order for it to be the bridge between the cultures and to really be that interface between Beirut and New York, that kind of fish harami, as they call them in Lebanon, it had to have its New York identity as much as it had its Lebanese identity.
But is it a testament to your own self-identity today, that you see yourself as literally both? The reason that the separation of Lebanese American, which we know what that means, versus American Lebanese, that in order to thrive in one of the most competitive, most brutal, cutthroat markets in the world, you can only take so much baggage with you.
My approach to cooking is always to ask why. And it's that curiosity that allowed me to deconstruct a lot of the food that I cook and reconstitute it in a different way. Because just because grandma's been doing it like this for 2 decades or whatever, a century or whatever the hell it is, doesn't mean that it's right or will get you the best flavor. So what we did here is, out of commitment to the culture and to the cuisine and to the heritage, and as an homage to my grandfather and my father and the family that I come from, and if you want, carrying that torch, I wanted to make sure that I did everything as correctly and as amazingly as possible. So when we approached the food here, we recreated it in the way we thought it would vocalize our vision of the cuisine the best. And what I mean by that is that, for example, if you eat in Lebanon today, and that's changing, by the way, because now it's very cool and very in to go into the food business and all that. But if you eat, let's say, a dish that has allspice and cinnamon and cloves and a touch of nutmeg and all that, the odds of you tasting the cinnamon and the allspice before you taste anything else are highly probable, because there is this automatic default to more spice is equal to flavor. While we here, we add no spice at all. We start with the virgin palate, and then we keep on adding spice until the spice is very far away, distant, while allowing all the rest of the ingredients to speak.
But are you letting Lebanon progress your own way?
I would be crucified if I went back to Lebanon, because people will be like, well, but this doesn't taste like hummus. I'm like, well, no, the hummus you're eating in Lebanon right now is no longer hummus.
So you're keeping Lebanon evolving in your own life. You've preserved something.
Yes.
Subjective.
Yes.
Is this a form of justice, in your opinion, to what happened to your family and what happened to your childhood, what happened to your hotel? Because Lebanon, you can't have.
Listen, I don't know. Justice is a big word.
But it's a huge word. But
Yeah.
the reason I ask you is your father's, the criminals that took your father away, the criminals that take a lot of people's lives away in Lebanon, the chances of them ever facing punishment for what they did are close to zero.
Correct.
If you're lucky,
Yeah.
maybe something good happens to you, that you have your form of poetic justice. If you're lucky, most of the time you don't. Is this a quiet form of making sure your father's dreams don't die? Even if they've died in Lebanon, they don't die abroad.
1,000,000%. I am in awe and admiration of what my grandfather and father did,
Yeah.
where my mother's heritage came, how she influenced my father, and I came out as a product of the two of them. And what I do every day is in reverence to what this amazing couple did and what my father did.
Yeah.
You know, my father almost died multiple times, you know, saving his own employees.
Yeah.
And protecting his family. So what I do is nothing in comparison. Ilili is a story of, in essence, an immigrant that took very big risks, that was committed to a vision, that did not waver, did not give up despite very difficult odds, and that was fortunate enough to have a team and a staff that appreciated and respected the journey that we embarked on to really nurture and push that journey forward.
Yeah.
Yani, when I say that we don't have the staff, unlike restaurants in Paris or Montreal and all that, when I built this concept, I knew that I wanted to grow it. And in order for me to grow it, if I was a hostage of an ethnic staff every time I wanted to open a branch, then the business model did not work. Yeah. And I had to find a way to make my American colleagues Lebanese in order for ilili to be where it is.
Yeah.
And when my staff says ma'ane, they say ma'ane, and when they break hara, they break hara. And they all understand all the idiosyncrasies, sorry, I'm getting stuck.
Idiosyncrasies.
Of what it is to eat Lebanese and all that. And I mean, I'll give you an example. I sit down and whenever we have enough new staff, I have dinner with them.
Okay.
We sit down.
Yeah.
We drink hara.
Yeah.
I show them how to grab the piece of pita. We eat together. I explain to them the whole wrapping with food. بعمل لك لقمة بتعمل لي لقمة ولقمتي أطيب من لقمتك ولقمتك أطيب من لقمتي, and then all of a sudden you have this amazing poetic culinary conversation that's happening at the table.
This is in a sense if you're a chef that's also serving as an ambassador, and a restaurant like ilili, and it's not just because it's doing well, it's the fact that you are representing a country. You're becoming a form of an embassy,
Cultural, yes.
Cultural attaché, whatever you want.
It's
I
totally agree with you.
And the visitors that are not Lebanese know Lebanon.
Yes.
And Lebanese that come to this restaurant are coming for the food.
Correct.
They may disagree with some things, but they'll still come.
Correct.
And they still enjoy it.
Correct.
But the Americans that visit, or the non-Lebanese, I mean, you are in a way projecting a Lebanon that, in a way, a Lebanon that could have not gone through a war.
Golden years. Those beautiful, 8mm films that you see from old Beirut and
right.
That's the Lebanon that for me.
And it's a spirit that is not necessarily evolving today at home, but it's a dream that can succeed outside.
And that is the biggest tragedy, is that Lebanon is a country with an unimaginable potential, an intelligentsia that is unparalleled, a basket of skills and intellect that is just unparalleled. And yet here we are. Your father died. My father died. We've all endured tragedy. We've all had great men that have influenced so many people that have, and to lose them for this result is an insult. Is the biggest insult of them all.
I'll maybe I'll take it from the depressing to the slightly less depressing. I honestly think Lebanon didn't die. Lebanon was killed, because death should just be a natural thing. And if a bad idea fails, it fails and it disappears. A decent idea, an idea that was not, on paper at least, it seemed good. It seemed like it would work out. Was brutally ended, was killed. And that kind of death, an unjust ending, I think is impossible to just turn the cheek and walk away from. People find forms of justice. And Lebanon's one of the few countries where a civil war ends and the situation is too difficult to reinvest. And civil war ends, that means it's over.
It was never over. Where are the
civil war? I mean, the fact that the civil war ended is almost now becoming a detail.
Where are the truth tribunals,
Yeah.
the reconciliation seminars, the forgive and forget,
the justice, the accountability that you end a war with, and the state rebuilding and the sovereignty you would expect? There's very few, and we can count them maybe on one hand, very few things that are in their heart Lebanese that have survived. Food is probably at the top of the list.
And it will, yeah.
Yeah, and so long as there's someone like you who's very passionate about their own history and food, I think the American that walks down the street here, that turns and sees a name, they don't know what it means. Maybe they wander in out of curiosity and they're eating a cuisine that they don't know.
Correct.
And suddenly they think Lebanon is something very special to them. It's someone like you that can do that. I'll just end it here. A lot has been said, a lot has been whispered about the meaning of ilili. We know what ilili means, but where did the name come from? You could have called this anything, and you chose a very soft Lebanese Arabic dialectical word.
So because the decor and the design of the concept were not Baba Massoud House of Falafel, and kitschy, this was a modern restaurant. What was I going to call it? Dunya, Beiti Beitak, Ahla Sahla.
But you could have gotten away with anything. You chose a word that's not. Yeah.
So my ex-girlfriend and the architect of the restaurant, if I remember correctly, and they will correct me, but they were chatting on either MSN Messenger or Skype. We were talking about names, and then either she tells him ilili or he tells her ilili. And I join the conversation, or they're like, oh, we found the name, and they're like, this is the name. And then because I'm very mathematical, so I love palindromes, and the zip code of the location is 10001.
I thought that was going to be the reason,
Yes,
actually.
yes.
I was going to ask you, but then I thought 10101 would have been ilili.
No. But because of that, believe it or not, I sent a survey to like 200 people.
Okay.
Ilili was like number 7 on it. They had selected other names, and then I liked the palindrome, and
so they just tossed the word out. They thought of it.
Yeah.
You like the pattern.
Yeah.
It is close enough to be the zip code.
Yeah.
So that's it.
That's it. And it felt it was very fitting for an immigrant that's telling his story. Tell me.
But it's
Hey, wait, it's Ulili.
It's ilili, exactly.
Yeah.
So
ilili c'est Beirut,
Okay.
Beirut style, Ilili.
and you're making sure it's told to a woman.
Yes.
So why not? Is it because the zip code is 5 digits?
No. It's because feminine is always softer.
There you go.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know, like.
But you know that. I don't think people.
We explain it. We explain it in our training manual.
Yeah.
We say, it's ilili is female to female or male to female,
Right.
but not male to male.
Not male to male.
Yeah.
And it's, that soft touch, I think, is what drives Lebanese in that wouldn't know otherwise. Because you walk by, there's no sign that it's Lebanese food. There's
And
no.
not even the decor. I mean, some people
Yeah.
thought that we were a Japanese restaurant. Other people thought we were a private club.
I've been told. I think that it's cedarwood.
Yes,
But that's. I mean, that's not something you would know right away by looking at it.
No.
Yeah.
You would have to be.
You'd have to really know your wood.
So if you want to take something really, if you want to understand the decor, the red chairs are supposed to be petals of the flower. The round tables are the inside of the flower.
I see.
And those are supposed to be the red tulips in the tail of Adonis. And the 6 columns are supposed to be the pine trees in the forest. And ilili is like a field of coquelicot, which is the flower that comes up that blooms only once. And at the time, when we were doing the getting inspired about the design, I wanted to go to a time when there were no Muslim, Christians, or Jews. So I'm like, let's go back as far as possible.
That's funny.
That's
funny.
They've ruined everything, those 3. Let's go to some time where it was all fun, debauchery, and celebration of life. The inside, the lattice, was inspired, the Phoenicians were seafarers,
yes,
and therefore
right,
the inside of a boat.
Yeah.
And
that's the one thing I noticed when walking. Yeah.
And then it morphed into a street in Beirut with rope lighting, and that this would be like, what a street in the modern Middle East would be, whether you're driving through Beirut or you're driving,
Yes.
And that's how we came about it.
You took pleasant memories of Lebanon, of Beirut, and you brought it to New York your way. I know your food not from ilili, from Naila. I mean, this is now maybe 12, 13 years ago. Sitting with my father in your restaurant in Washington, D.C., having great food, great company, but that's all I know is that the food was great, the company was great. The place is called Naila.
It's my sister's name.
It's your sister's name.
And that's the name of the daughter of one of the investors.
Right.
And at the time when Bashar al-Amour, the owner of Naila, wanted to name it this way, he asked me. My sister was a beautiful young lady. She was like the Brooke Shields of her era.
Yes.
So he's like, do you mind if we call it Naila? I said, no, absolutely not. He's like, I still remember how good looking she was. I'm like, it's okay. Now I know why people wanted to do sleepovers all the time.
But something about Naila, which I was younger and maybe I would look at differently now, is that I always thought Naila was just a little too Lebanese.
Yes.
And I say that with caution. I don't mean it in a bad way.
But that I had no control over that.
Ilili, the refreshing thing about Ilili is that you need to go for the food, and then Lebanon, if it's celebrated through the food, not because it's a Lebanese restaurant.
Correct.
And that's a typical New York success story. So thank you, Philippe.
Thank you.
All the personal ingredients necessary for a Lebanese hospitality story. And I highly recommend checking out Philippe's restaurant in Manhattan. The website is below in the details box. Book a table and experience Lebanon Philippe's way. He is an ambassador of sorts today for Lebanese cuisine in New York. Highly recommended. And separate from hospitality, Philippe's story is also one of family legacy and keeping a family tradition going, whether in Lebanon or abroad. And when it comes to Beirut itself, there's plenty of family legacy and plenty of family stories where generations of one family keep pursuing the same craft, the same tradition, the same expertise, oftentimes against the odds. And next week we'll be in a neighborhood named after a family that owns among the most beautiful Ottoman-era homes still standing in Beirut today. And we head straight to Sursut Palace to talk about the Sursut family with Roderick Sursut. And he'll share stories from his family's trajectory, riding the Ottoman Empire's demise through the French Mandate and modern Lebanese history throughout its periods of wealth and ruin. And Roderick Sursut will also share his thoughts on Beirut's rapidly changing urban landscape and what the Civil War and post-Civil War years did, not just to Sursut neighborhood itself, to Beirut and Lebanon altogether. And in the meantime, if you want to stay updated with upcoming episodes, please subscribe through your preferred podcast platform or YouTube itself. We have a channel there. Search for the Beirut Banyan and you'll find it. And this week we shared the personal ingredients that comprise a chef. And next week we'll explore the foundations for family legacy. Until next time, I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.